Okay, so welcome back. Uh, Today, I'm actually going to talk about a couple of systems, one of which I just did a spec review for here recently, and that was the fourth generation X1 Extreme by Lenovo. It just so happens when I was actually doing those specs and I was pulling them, they didn't have a spec review or reference sheet on the Lenovo site yet for that, but now they do. In addition to that, they also introduced the P1 Gen 4 as well as the T15g or T15 Golf, which I've actually talked about before. But now they have the second generation. And because they introduced all those laptops really around the same time, at least here in the United States, I just figured I would actually compare them all. I'm using the same format that I normally use when I record spec reviews for ThinkPads. So this time around, what I ended up doing is I created this spreadsheet with all three models, and we're just going to go through, we're going to talk about some of the features and just to kind of see what some of the differences are. In addition to that, what I'm actually going to talk to you about are the prices, and I do have a separate sheet where I'm going to show you how they rack and stack when you compare these three models to each other. The reason being is if you look at the P1 and the X1 Extreme on paper, they actually are really, really close. Yes, there are some options you can get on one you can't get on the other. And then if you throw the T15G into the mix, it is a little bit larger frame. However, it has a lot of the same sort of features too, and you may find that the same types of users might be interested in all three. So, for instance, a person like me, as a matter of fact, when the T15G came out, I actually was totally on board with that laptop and was considering when it came time to upgrade, replacing it, or excuse me, replacing the X1 Extreme that I currently have with that particular laptop. So that is the main reason why the T15G is here now. Once again, considering the processor and the GPU that they offer, it would be crazy not to actually talk about it when I talk about the X1 Extreme Gen 4 as well as the P1 Gen 4. And if you're not familiar with the P1, the big difference is that is a workstation, but it is actually built in the same, it uses the same frame as the X1 Extreme. So they're very, very close. Well, actually, they're the exact same when it comes to size. It's just the specs are a little bit different. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into this. But one thing I will mention is this is going to be based on what's available in the United States. I know that in some areas, like one of my viewers mentioned, like Australia, they had actually introduced, I believe it was the P1 Gen 4 there before they introduced it here. I was really trying to wait until we got everything available to us in our market just to see what they was going to look like, since sometimes the specs do change a little bit for what's offered in the individual market. In addition to that, as of yesterday, which was the 3rd of August, there were only models that were listed on the site. There was no option to customize. So when I do the price comparison, it's not going to be based on me picking features and then trying to tally them, get them close, because I wasn't really able to do that. What I ended up doing is I took the lowest models that they were starting at, the prices were starting at, and I compared those three as well. So you'll see that when I get to it. But once again, we're going to jump right into it. So moving on to the spreadsheet. As you can see, I will also upload this spreadsheet just like I did on my last video, so everyone can actually have access to it. But when you start to look in here, you'll notice that the one thing that looks different about the spreadsheet now is now I have three when I normally have two models on here. I think one of these I actually had two models, and it was when I reviewed the X1 Extreme 1, 2, and 3. So it worked, but normally I don't do it this way. So getting right into it, the first thing we're going to talk about, and I'm just briefly going to mention this only because I do have a separate sheet that's going to talk about the pricing, but you can see kind of where they start. They are very, very similar. However, the models that they're speccing right now as like the bare bones basic model, they do vary in certain instances, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So moving right along, first thing we're going to talk about is going to be the processor. So what you'll see here, and this kind of threw me for a loop, starting with the Gen 4, you're going to get your Core i7 11th generation processors, as well as an i9 and a Xeon processor. Okay, so what I ended up doing here is where there is a difference, I highlighted it in the red. So what you'll see here is if you go over to the X1 Extreme Gen 4, there really isn't a difference here. I mean, it doesn't have that Xeon, but I'm not going to add it just to highlight in red and say it's not available because that would be confusing. But if you go over to the T15G, You will notice that they actually add an i5 that you don't see on any of these other two. In addition to that, you get an additional Xeon choice. So you get the W11955M. That's actually kind of confusing to me, mainly because I figured if you're going to give an extra choice for a Xeon processor, it would have been on the workstation, so the P1, and not the T15G, but they decided to do otherwise. So I'm curious to see once this shakes out if that does change, because once again, the P1 is a workstation. To me, it seems like it should have more Xeon processors available, if any of these. Next step, or I should say the next column here, the main difference is you can get the Windows Pro for workstations for your Gen 1 or your P1 Gen 4. You can also get Linux Red Hat Enterprise. So you don't get those two options with these other two, although you do have options for Linux on these other two. And while I don't see it in here, but when I checked the SpecRef, I did not see an option for Fedora on the Gen 4. Once again, I'm not going to add that just to say it's not available because that would be confusing. But just know that it's not on here. It is on these other two if you are so inclined to actually spec that operating system. Let's see, the next thing. So this is the big thing actually because like I discussed previously, the screen format changed for the X1 Extreme Gen 4. Now they use a 1610 versus the 15-inch, the 15.6-inch screen they used to use, and what I currently have on the first gen. Second and third gen have that too. But with the Gen 4, they went with the 16-inch screen, and because the P1 uses the same chassis, it has the same screen as well. You can look through here and you can see that the choices are the same. You've got your 2K screens, you've got your 4K screens. Some are touch, some aren't. Actually, let's see, only one touchscreen option is available here. And then also over here for the P1, supports up to 4 displays. And I put a note down here just because I just expected there to be 10-bit, but there was no 10-bit panel listed for the P1. And of course, for neither one of these. Now, jumping over to your 15G, this is where it's going to be a little bit different because they do not have that 1610 format. They actually have the traditional, I say traditional because that's what I'm used to, 15.6 inch screen. However, what you can get over here, because all the screens are going to be different because of the size, you have the option to get a 1080 screen still if you want to. Versus if you look at the other two, the lowest resolution you can go down to is 2K. So, you know, you may be like me and you like to save battery life, so you generally get 1080 screens. That's normally what I do. I also have a monitor that I use so I can, you know, upload it to 2K, and then downstairs I can actually view it in 4K if I want to. So I'm good to go. I don't really need it on my laptop. Plus, these old eyes, I have a hard time determining what the difference is. One of the things you will see, and like I said, we've already discussed the nits that are going to be available on the X1 Extreme Gen 4. They're the same on the P1. You get up to about 600 nits. If you jump over here, you can get an IPS panel that actually is non-touch. That's actually 600 nits as well, and it's 4K. If you want to do the touch version, just keep in mind, now you're going to be down to 400 nits, and then 500 nits HDR at its peak. Now, the one thing that kind of also confused me, because once again, I'm thinking, if you're going to have this option, it would be on the workstation and not necessarily the 15G, but it's still pretty cool, is the fact that it supports 5 independent displays. And that 5 independent displays includes the actual laptop monitor, okay? Whereas the other two, they only support a total of 4 displays. So that will be 4 or 3 plus the laptop screen. I just thought it was neat that the 15G actually, you know, did more versus the P1. Once again, just because I'm expecting a workstation to be able to do these sorts of things. Now, with all that being said, I don't really know what the need would be for that many monitors on a device like the 15G for a person like me, as an editor, content creator, that type of stuff, photographer. I just can't see having that many displays. Plus, it would just tax the GPU. But I don't know. It's cool that you have that option. So getting into the GPU. All right, this is where it gets kind of crazy. One of the things that I will mention is there was a couple of typos on the T15G spec ref. So if you reference the website, you will notice that sometimes it mentions the I'm going to jump over here, NVIDIA T15g, or I should say 4 gigabytes GPU that's only available on the P1. That's the base GPU. But sometimes they mention that as being available or actually as an option on the 15G Gen 2 spec sheet. I don't know why, but I put a note in here because sometimes it'll say something's not available unless you get this processor. But once again, that processor is not available. But if we start with the P1, you'll notice that, yes, you have a ridiculous amount of processors to choose from. Now, the thing that was expected is you're going to get those A series. So the RTX A series, you'll get the former Quattro, and I guess they still are called Quattro processors because that is generally what workstations are for, that type of software that needs to utilize, that type of GPU performance. I didn't expect to ever see that on the X1 Extreme because, once again, it is not a workstation. We're not doing a lot of the modeling and the AutoCAD, that type of stuff. Not saying that you can't use it, but I would imagine the person that's going to be solely doing that type of stuff, they're going to be getting a workstation anyway. And then when you get to the 15G, you're basically getting not really a lot of choices, but you are getting some great processors. The 3070, which is awesome, and then of course my favorite, the RTX 3080, my favorite as of right now. You get that particular processor. Now, all of these come with integrated graphics as well, but these are just your discrete options. There is another difference here. So your vapor cooling is only going to be available. So your vapor cooling chamber that I discussed in the previous video, that basically helps keep the CPU and really the GPU, keep it cooler, considering that these laptops are like 3.9 pounds. If you get the faster cards that require that type of cooling, then it's going to take up more space inside of the laptop. So therefore, you won't have other options. And we'll get to that when we get down the line. But that chamber on the P1 Gen 4 is only going to be available for the RTX A3000, 4000, 5000, and then the 3070 and the 3080. On the X1 Extreme Gen 4, it's only going to be available for the 3060, 70, and the 80. And then over on the 15G, T15G, it doesn't matter because it's actually a larger laptop. So the way that I understand it, the vapor chamber will not be in this laptop. And once again, when we start talking about the configuration, the SSDs and all that stuff, you'll kind of see why. Like I said, there's more space inside of this frame. It's thicker. You have better cooling. At least you should, theoretically. And by the way, speaking of should, I put that the vapor chamber should be available only with those three for the X1 Extreme Gen 4 because it doesn't necessarily say that. It's just if you read the other stuff, and then if you actually go to their website where you shop, and you kind of put it all together, that actually makes sense, which would be very close to what it is on the P1. All right, so cameras. Cameras are different. We've already talked about now that in the previous video, your X1 Extreme Gen 4 is going to get a 1080 webcam, which is pretty neat. The difference here, and I'm not going to really harp on this too much, is you're not going to get that as an option with your 15G. To me, I think that some of these things they just decided not to change because you want to differentiate those lines, right? Because if you put everything the same on the T15G, now they're actually starting to compete with each other. Granted, you still can't get over that size because it still is 2 pounds heavier, but there is an advantage with that size. But once again, the camera stays 720p. But the P1 and then also the X1 Extreme, they go to the 1080p, as well as they get the hybrid IR, the shutter, which most ThinkPads come with nowadays, or you have the option to spec no camera with all of these. All right, memory. So now this is where the size advantage kind of comes in the favor of the T15G. If you look at the P1 and you look at the X1 Extreme, you're getting 64 gigs of DDR4 RAM at 3200 dual channel, 3200 megahertz dual channel, and there's 2 slots. Okay, so if you jump over to the 15G, you have more space, more room on the motherboard, etc. You get 128 gigs of DDR4 3200 RAM. And you're going to get 4 slots to space that stuff out in. So whatever makes the most sense when you're buying memory, you can go with the cheaper option now because, you know, you're only going to get 128. But if you say, hey, it's cheaper for me to buy, you know, what is it, 4 32 GB sticks than it is to try to go and buy, you know, 2 64 GB sticks, you got options. But once again, that's one of the advantages of having a larger laptop. In addition to that, we get into the storage. The storage is where the GPU I spoke about earlier comes back into play, because in the event that you decide to get the 3060, the 3070, the 3080, or you decide to get the A 3000, 4000, and 5000, and this is, of course, that's on the P1, the previous was on the X1 Extreme. Now you're going to end up getting that Vapor Bay. So then you will no longer have the option to get the, I should say, you'll no longer have the option to have a second SSD inside of those two laptops. Versus if you look over at the 15G, the 15G doesn't matter. You're going to have up to 3 SSDs because, once again, you have more space, and they both have RAID support. And then there's, I should say 2 of them do. But once again, over on the P1 and X1 Extreme side, you don't have that as an option. Now, it does say that you can go up to 4 terabytes total. Granted, your 15G, you can go up to 6 gigabytes total because each one of those slots will take up to 2 terabytes of SSD. All right. The batteries. Okay, so the batteries, as to be expected, battery life for your P1 and your X1 Extreme are going to be the same. That actually only makes sense, but your T15 Golf will actually have lower battery life. And keep in mind, these are just estimates, and I'll have some notes in here too, by the way. If you look at this and you want to look at the notes, feel free. But they're saying, even though it has a larger battery, it's going to only get 7 hours using Mobile Mark 18. The battery in the T15G, I actually should have made this red. I just realized that, is 94 watt hours versus, I'm going to go ahead and change this right now, versus the 90 watt hours that you get with the other two. Okay, next is the audio. The audio, so when I spoke about the X1 Extreme Gen 4 previously, I talked about the new configuration with the firing speaker system. So both the P1 and the X1 have that, or the Extreme have that, and your Gen 2 doesn't. It actually has a larger keyboard, and we'll talk about the keyboard in a minute, but it doesn't have the same layout. So you're not going to get those same upfiring speakers that you get on the other two. Now, granted, I don't even really use laptop speakers, so that's not really a bad thing for me. I use external audio. But for others, it might be a big deal. And then we're going to get into security. So with the security, the only thing I would say that I did mention here, and at first, I didn't want to do this up top as far as like putting stuff that wasn't available, but I think it was pretty clear to do it down here, since the only one that did not have these two options was the 15G, and it was your Intel hardware shield or your self-healing BIOS. It's just not an option on the 15G. I'm hoping they worked out the self-healing BIOS, because I think there were some issues with it with the last generation of the X1 Extreme and the P1. Let's see, ports and slots. All right, once again, we're going to go back to having that advantage of the bigger frame. Your X1 Extreme and the P1 is going to be the exact same. However, with your T15, now you're going to get an extra USB-C. You're also going to get a HDMI, let's see, so your HDMI 2.1, it says on the paper, this is one of the ones where I said that it's a typo. It really should just say it has HDMI, but I put it because it's different. It's saying that it's on a NVIDIA T1200 model, but the T1200 is not going to be offered with this laptop, at least as of right now. Looking at the spec sheet, it is not an option. So I think maybe this was an artifact when somebody was working on the P1. Not 100% sure, but I still included it up here. You're going to get Ethernet down here, which you're not going to get Ethernet with the other two. And you have the option for a smart card reader. Once again, bigger frame, you can have more stuff. All right, connectivity. So the only thing that I saw that was really different, and some of this stuff, the way it was like organized, was like, wow, you should just put the exact same thing, but they didn't. So I kind of had to decipher. But to me, it seems like it's the exact same with the exception of with your T15 Gen 2, you can spec no LAN and I should say, Bluetooth. Uh, and that's actually literally what it said. So kind of curious to see how that works. If you can just like have that whenever they allow us to customize to just select that option, or if you don't select something, it doesn't come with the other one. I don't know, but yeah, according to the spec sheet, you can have no LAN, WLAN, and Bluetooth. All right, now speaking of all those changes that really led to this next part, the size. So the size of your P1 and your Gen 4, they're all going to be fairly slender. I mean, they're small considering what these things can do. Powerful, lightweight laptops. If you look at the touchscreen, you're going to get a laptop that's going to be about 14.15 inches wide. And then, you know, if we're talking about depth, it's going to be 9.99. And then it's only going to be 0.72 inches thick. Now, keep in mind, the overall dimensions of this is going to be a little bit different, mainly because you have that 16:10 screen versus when you look at the touch screen version of the 15G, where you have your depth now is going, or excuse me, your width is going to be 14.24. So it's going to be a little bit wider. However, the depth is going to be 9.67. So it's not going to be as deep, or, you know, depending on how you describe your laptops, you know, the distance from you to the end of to the screen is what I should say, is what I'm referring to. And it's mainly because your screen is actually going to be smaller in that particular dimension. And then now it's going to be thicker, and the thickness is pretty considerable. And really, it's funny because if you look at the pictures, when I was looking at the T15G, it really reminded me of the T430, which I really like, to be honest with you, because I like the idea that I'm getting something that's built like a tank, and that's what it looks like. It actually has the same hinges too, from what I can tell. So I like that, you know. But if you're looking for that portable, lightweight, we'll jump down here to the weights. Touch models for your P1 and your X1 Extreme Gen 4, it's going to be 4.1 pounds. Non-touch is going to be 3.99 pounds. And then if you start looking at the touch models for the T15 Golf, you just added, well, it's 6.75 pounds. So over 2 pounds, about 2.5 pounds actually, which is a considerable amount, but it's still a 6.75 pound laptop. To me, it's not that heavy. I think my T430 with the extended battery is heavier. And then the non-touch models are 6.32. That would be me, you know, if I did get this, because I don't really like touch screens. Finally, the keyboard. Keyboard is actually a different format. So they were able to include a number pad, which I love, and I totally miss having a number pad on my laptops on the T15 Golf. The other two have the exact same number pad. So, or the exact same keyboard. So what I'm going to do now is actually, I'm going to jump on over here to the price comparison. All right, and this is what it looks like. So here, this is just going to be really quick, but the way this is actually set up is I have the starting system. So the cheapest systems they have on the laptop, or excuse me, on the website for the United States currently that you can buy. And if you look at the very top here, you'll see that the starting prices for the Gen 1 or Gen 4 P1, 1859, 1907 for the X1 Extreme Gen 4, and 2159 for the T15 Gen 2. All right, they're all really close. And once again, I did the exact same thing. I highlighted in red where the differences lie. So we start here with the processors, all the same. We look at the operating systems. They expect all the same operating systems. When you get down here, you're going to get a 2K screen with the P1 and the X1, and over here you're only going to get the 1080, you know, full HD screen. So it is a little bit brighter though, so it's 500 nits. And I would imagine it's probably a little bit better on battery life. But according to the specs for Mobile Mark, this one gets worse battery life anyway. Moving right along, the memory is going to be the same, hard drive is going to be the same, warranty is going to be the same. The AC adapter is going to be larger. Once again, you have a larger battery, you have that 94 watt hours, so you get a 230 watt battery or AC adapter. And then we start getting into the processor. So the processors are different. Uh, the NVIDIA T 1200, I would say it's very close to the RTX 350 Ti, which is over here on your X1 Extreme. And then, in my opinion, the 3070 is a much better, especially with 8 gigabytes. It's going to be a better processor than either one of these. Like I said, I think the 350 Ti and the T1200 are very, very close. The next thing would be your camera. You're going to get a better camera with the X1 and the P1 at this price point. And then fingerprint reader is the same. Keyboard, of course, is going to be different because you're going to get the number pad because it's a larger system. And yeah, that's really about it. So at this price, you're paying, let's see, you're paying $200 more than the P1. But what are you getting over here? You're getting less of a screen. Depending on how you look at it. Like I said, I like brightness because I like using my laptop outside. You're getting a more powerful AC adapter, but you're getting a better graphics card. And, I guess it could be debated whether it's worth $200 over the 3050. I would say that it is because I think the 3070 is a good card. To me, the 3050 is more like a 1650, but yeah, and plus it's only 4 gigabytes. I'd much rather pay my little extra and have this card. And I like the idea of having the number pad. Once again, the camera is not really a big deal for me. Now, if I was looking at some of the benefits of the X1 over the other two, I would definitely say, price-wise, you're paying less than the Gen 2 T15 Golf, and of course, it weighs less. Same thing is going to apply with the P1 Gen 4, and granted, you're paying even less money than the X1 Extreme. So this is the cheapest of the bunch, and really between the Gen 4 the P1 and the X1, I don't really see a big difference between these two. So I would probably save my money and go with the P1 Gen 4 over the X1 Extreme Gen 4 when we're talking about the base models. Now, I do know eventually there will be more options. You'll be able to customize, and then you can actually go in, configure it however you want, and then compare prices based on that. And the cool thing about this is if you just really find out that you like one over the other, maybe there's some things about them that are unique. Like maybe you just really like the size, whether it's less or more. Well, then that makes your decision very clear. If you're talking about less weight, now granted, you still got to pick between two. And then, you can start getting into the difference between those two. And hopefully this spreadsheet can still help you because now you can start looking at processors and GPUs because with the P1 and the X1, everything else is really going to be the same. Now, if the size is not an issue or you prefer just a larger laptop or you want a larger keyboard with that number pad, well, then it's really, really clear if you're willing to give up some of the things you just can't get. So for instance, like that camera, if that's a deal breaker for you, it may not be an option. You can't get a 1080 on the Gen 2 T15G. And then, like I said, once you start configuring it, that price may be more expensive than the other two. So, and then also the battery life, right? Because now it's supposedly getting less battery than the other two. But I think that's about it. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments. I will leave links to this spreadsheet that everybody can access. And then I will also put up the links for the spec reference sheet as well. I think that's it. Agent Fitz signing out. Oh, click like and subscribe. Agent Fitz signing out.